that you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
Have you ever stopped to consider that the pleasure you so eagerly seek might actually be the greatest prison in your life? What if each moment of instant gratification was silently eroding your ability to live a deep and meaningful life? Almost a century ago, while the world still feared totalitarian governments that controlled through force, Huxley envisioned something much more subtle and effective. A society enslaved not by terror, but by pleasure. People will come to love their oppression, he wrote, predicting a system in which social control would be exercised not through imposition, but through the constant seduction of the senses. When we look around us today, it's impossible not to see this prophecy materializing on every corner, in every pocket, in every moment of boredom filled by a bright screen. The technology that was supposed to liberate us has ended up becoming the means by which we are constantly drawn into a cycle of superficial stimuli and empty gratification. Instead of books that challenge our understanding of the world, we consume content designed to maintain our engagement just long enough to see the next advertisement. Instead of deep conversations that nourish our soul, we settle for digital interactions that simulate connection, but rarely reach the deeper layers of who we are. Entertainment has ceased to be a break from everyday life to become the constant backdrop against which all experience is measured. If something isn't immediately stimulating, we conclude it's not worth our time or attention. This is the first and perhaps most insidious link in the chain: the growing inability to tolerate any experience that doesn't offer immediate returns. The constant promise that the next notification, the next video, the next purchase will finally bring the satisfaction we seek keeps the cycle in perpetual motion. As in a perfectly designed system to maximize engagement, we are kept in a state of near satisfaction, always close enough to fulfillment to continue seeking, but never truly satisfied. And so, day after day, moment after moment, we voluntarily surrender our attention, our time, and ultimately our inner freedom to forces that have no real interest in our flourishing as human beings. When Huxley said that people would love their servitude, perhaps the most frightening thing is that he was absolutely right. Have you noticed how, after spending hours in an endless cycle of screen scrolling, you feel strangely emptier than before? This is the great paradox of pleasure. The more desperately we pursue it as an end in itself, the more it seems to slip through our fingers like fine sand. The problem isn't with pleasure itself. Pleasant sensations are a natural and important part of the human experience. The issue lies in transforming it into the central goal of existence, the ultimate criterion by which we measure the value of each moment, each relationship, each choice we make throughout the day. When pleasure becomes the measuring standard for all experiences, we begin to systematically avoid everything that causes discomfort, everything that requires effort, everything that doesn't produce an immediate sensation of satisfaction. Paradoxically, this constant flight from discomfort ends up eliminating life's most deeply rewarding experiences, those that require persistence, effort, and even periods of frustration. Literature that transforms our worldview is rarely comfortable to read. Relationships that touch our hearts most deeply come with vulnerability and emotional risk. Work that brings true meaning often requires us to face obstacles and overcome limitations. By eliminating all of this in the name of immediate pleasure, we are inadvertently removing the very sources of lasting meaning. This vicious cycle has profound psychological consequences. The more we become accustomed to instant gratification, the lower our tolerance becomes for any form of discomfort or delayed satisfaction. The result is a downward spiral where we need increasingly intense stimuli to feel anything, while our ability to find satisfaction in everyday experiences progressively diminishes. Thus emerge the alarming mental health statistics we see today: anxiety, depression, screen addiction, and a widespread epidemic of disconnection, even as we remain technically more connected than we've ever been in human history. Pleasure, when transformed into a deity, becomes our most cruel executioner. In a world where your attention is pursued, captured, and sold as a commodity, every moment you spend absorbed in a screen represents commercial value for someone. This is no longer just a metaphor. It's an explicit and highly profitable business model that sustains much of the digital economy. When you open a free app, you're implicitly entering a transaction where the currency isn't your money, but rather your most precious mental resources, your attention, your behavioral data, your irreversible lifetime. Behind every carefully designed interface exists a team of specialists whose job is to keep you engaged for as long as possible. The techniques employed for this purpose aren't accidental or naive. They're meticulously refined through billions of data points, A/B tests, and the application of advanced psychological principles. The infinite feed, the red notification, the automatically starting video, all are mechanisms deliberately designed to exploit known vulnerabilities in the architecture of our brain. The result is a fundamental asymmetry of power. On one side, technology companies with vast resources, detailed behavioral data, and sophisticated algorithms. On the other, a human brain that evolved in a radically different environment with limited abilities to resist the stimuli to which it is naturally attracted. It's an unequal fight from the start. This dynamic transforms pleasure into a particularly effective tool of control. Unlike open coercion that generates resistance, control via pleasure is self-imposed and therefore almost impossible to clearly perceive. We feel like free agents while following behavioral patterns meticulously orchestrated to benefit others. As consumers in a system where our attention is the product, not the client, we face a profound existential dilemma. How much of our consciousness, our limited time on this planet, are we willing to surrender in exchange for momentary distractions? How many hours of life do we trade for content carefully calibrated to keep us in a state of perpetual near satisfaction? Have you noticed how it's become difficult to sit and read a long book without feeling the urge to check your phone? This isn't an isolated personal failure. It's a symptom of a collective cognitive transformation that's occurring as our minds adapt to an environment of constant interruptions and fragmented stimuli. Philosopher Matthew Crawford observes that attention is a resource, a good that we can cultivate and spend. Like any resource, when it's constantly directed toward superficial stimuli, it becomes unavailable for deeper tasks. The result is a gradual atrophy of our capacity for sustained concentration, a fundamental skill not just for deep thinking, but for the very experience of meaning. Our mind, in response to information overload and the cycle of intermittent rewards offered by social networks and digital entertainment, adapts to privilege quick and superficial processing at the expense of deep contemplation. This neurological shift has consequences that go far beyond our ability to read books. Moral reflection, aesthetic appreciation, deep empathy, and self-awareness. All these essential dimensions of human experience depend on our ability to maintain focused attention and sustained engagement. As this capacity diminishes, so does our ability to access the experiences that traditionally give meaning to human existence. Thinker Neil Postman warned decades ago that we were amusing ourselves to death, an observation that seems prophetic in the era of incessant notifications and ubiquitous entertainment. What he realized was that a culture dominated by pleasure and entertainment doesn't just change what we think, but fundamentally how we think. In this environment, complex concepts that cannot be easily reduced to sound bites or viral content become increasingly difficult to communicate and understand. Fundamental questions about justice, meaning, and purpose, questions that require nuance, patience, and depth, are replaced by simplifications that can be quickly consumed and discarded without disturbing our psychological comfort. In silence and quietude, when external stimuli diminish, the deepest questions of existence naturally emerge. Who am I really? What gives meaning to my life? What will I do with the limited time I have on this planet? These questions are uncomfortable precisely because they are important, because they touch on the core of what it means to be human. Constant pleasure functions as a powerful anesthetic against this existential discomfort. Each time we feel the emergence of a deep restlessness, we have at our fingertips an arsenal of distractions designed to redirect our attention to something more pleasant, more immediate, less demanding. This systematic escape from discomfort through pleasure has a profound cost. Without confronting the fundamental questions of existence, we lose the opportunity to develop what philosophers call authenticity, the capacity to live according to values that genuinely reflect who we are and what we consider meaningful. It is in confrontation with limitations, with suffering, with the inevitability of death, that we often discover what we truly value. As Viktor Frankl observed after surviving the concentration camps, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. But to find that meaning, we need to be willing to remain present with our pain instead of immediately anesthetizing it. Our culture of instant gratification makes this presence increasingly difficult. The ability to sit with uncomfortable emotions, sadness, boredom, anxiety, without immediately seeking external relief is a skill that is being systematically eroded. In its place, we develop almost automatic reflexes of seeking distraction at the first sign of internal discomfort. This existential anesthesia represents perhaps the most profound form of slavery predicted by Huxley. Not just control over behavior, but a fundamental limitation of consciousness. By constantly avoiding confrontation with existential questions through pleasure, we lose access to the deepest layers of meaning and purpose that make human life not just tolerable, but deeply valuable. Have you noticed how, despite being technically more connected than any previous generation, there is a widespread feeling of loneliness and disconnection permeating our society? This paradox points to a fundamental transformation in the nature of human relationships in the era of immediate pleasure. Deep relationships are by nature challenging. They require vulnerability, commitment, the ability to navigate conflicts, and willingness to prioritize others' needs above our own. In other words, they often require us to tolerate significant discomfort in the name of something that transcends immediate gratification. In a culture dominated by the logic of pleasure, this willingness for relational discomfort becomes increasingly rare. If the primary value is to feel good now, why invest in the hard and sometimes painful work of building deep bonds? If inconvenience can be avoided with a simple screen swipe, why submit ourselves to the limitations and frustrations inherent in human relationships? Digital platforms, although ostensibly designed to connect people, often reinforce this mentality. Human interaction is transformed into just another form of consumption, something to be optimized to maximize pleasure and minimize discomfort. Algorithms learn what pleases us and systematically filter what might challenge us, creating bubbles of experience that are increasingly comfortable and increasingly less transformative. The result is a paradoxical form of isolation amid hyperconnection. We are constantly in superficial contact with dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of people, while experiencing record levels of deep loneliness. As psychologist Carl Jung observed long before the digital era, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. This relational impoverishment has profound consequences that go beyond individual well-being. Communities, families, neighborhoods, civic associations that traditionally provided structure and meaning depend precisely on the type of long-term commitment and tolerance for discomfort that is being systematically eroded. As these bonds weaken, we lose not only interpersonal connection, but also the sense of belonging to something greater than ourselves. If Huxley's diagnosis is correct, if we are indeed becoming slaves to our own desire for pleasure, then what would be the path to true freedom? The answer lies not in abandoning pleasure, but in restoring it to its proper place within a balanced and meaningful life. The first step in this journey is the development of awareness. Begin by observing your own patterns of media consumption, entertainment, and technology use. How much time do you spend on activities that offer momentary pleasure, but leave little lasting impact? What are the triggers that lead you to seek distraction when internal discomfort arises? Simply noticing these patterns without immediate judgment already begins to break their automatic power over us. The second step involves deliberately cultivating the capacity for deep engagement, what philosopher Cal Newport calls deep work. This means creating spaces in your life free from digital distractions, where you can dedicate sustained attention to meaningful activities, deep reading, unhurried conversations, creation that requires concentration, or simply silent contemplation. Equally important is the rehabilitation of our capacity to tolerate psychological discomfort. Boredom, frustration, sadness, and anxiety are not simply negative states to be eliminated. They are important signals, often portals for growth and self-discovery. When we learn to sit with these states instead of immediately seeking relief, we discover internal resources we didn't know we possessed. We also need to reconsider our relationship with technology. This doesn't mean rejecting digital innovations, but rather using them with intentionality and clear boundaries. Ask yourself, are these tools helping me live according to my deepest values, or are they drawing me away from them? Are they expanding my agency and freedom, or subtly diminishing them? Perhaps most fundamental is the rediscovery of sources of meaning that transcend immediate pleasure. Whether through commitments to causes greater than ourselves, relationships of mutual care, work with a clear purpose, or spiritual practices, we need to recover the understanding that the richest human life is not necessarily the most pleasurable, but the most meaningful. As Huxley himself wrote in his later reflections, there are things known and there are things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. Opening these doors requires courage to look beyond the seductive distractions that constantly compete for our attention, toward the deeper truths that can guide us to authentic freedom. In the end, what Huxley was trying to show us was not that we should reject pleasure, but that we should rediscover its more authentic and profound nature. True pleasure doesn't come from continuous stimulation of the senses or immediate satisfaction of every impulse, but emerges as a natural byproduct of a life lived with purpose, presence, and genuine connection. Perhaps the final irony is this: by freeing ourselves from the tyranny of superficial pleasure, we become capable of experiencing much deeper and more lasting joys. The ecstasy of being completely absorbed in meaningful work, the satisfaction of overcoming a challenge that initially seemed impossible, the quiet but profound joy of authentic human connection, the peace that comes from knowing you're living in alignment with your deepest values. The question that remains for you is simply this: are you willing to give up the comfort of perpetual distraction to rediscover the fullness of what it means to be truly alive? The slavery that Huxley predicted only works as long as we remain unconscious of our chains. And these chains, though made of pleasure, are no less real than those made of iron. True freedom begins with a simple act of attention. The decision to look honestly at your life and ask whether the pleasure you pursue is really serving the person you aspire to be. In this moment of clarity, even if momentary, you regain the power of choice. And with it, the possibility of a life not merely pleasant, but genuinely meaningful. As Huxley wrote in his final novel, Island, it's a little too late in the day for men to be just creatures of their habits, wanting only comfort. Perhaps it's time to discover what else we can be, beyond pleasure seekers in a brave new world.